Hey everybody, I'm here to tell you a little bit about the Lodi Native Project and the four wines that are featured in this unique pack we put together of 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018 Marion's Vineyard Lodi Native Old Vine Zin. And so some of you may ask, what is unique about the Lodi Native wines compared to our normal Marion's Vineyard wine? Well, you got to back it up almost 10 years now to about 2011, and myself and a group of other winemakers got together, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to really demonstrate the distinct quality that some of these really old vineyards have in Lodi, and demonstrate the terroir of it and the differences we see from vineyard to vineyard across the region when most people drive through the area and just see a homogeneous area of vineyards and vines. And so after many meetings and many glasses of wine and several beers in some people's cases, we settled on this concept of the Lodi Native Project, which really was each of us chose a single old vineyard to work with, and then we all committed to making those wines in basically a hands-off or more natural approach. And so what does hands-off or natural approach mean? Well, quite simply, it's kind of following more traditional methods of winemaking that eliminate a lot of the additions and manipulation techniques that many winemakers use in order to push a wine in a certain direction. And so in our case, the only additives we were allowing were sulfites, which act as an antioxidant. So there was no water additions to reduce the sugar. There were no acid additions to plump up the acids. There were no tannin additions to bring more tannin or structure. There was no new oak, so the wine went all into neutral barrels, so that the ultimate wine was kind of a direct reflection of the vineyard site. And I learned a lot through this process. The first vintage we did it was 2012, and we've continued making this wine ever since. And I always find it a fascinating representation of the vineyard and of the wine. And it's usually the first wine, or the first pick we make ends up being in our Marion's Vineyard Lodi Native Zinfandel. And so we'll come out here usually in mid-August to late August and pick a couple of tons of grapes and ferment it natively on the natural yeast. So we're using the ambient yeast that come in on the grapes or are resident in the winery to ferment it naturally. And normally in a winemaking process, where you want to control the fermentation much more, you're going to be inoculating it with selected yeast, and you're going to be doing it at a full dosage so that you can get the fermentation started and there's less of a risk of bacteria or other problematic organisms getting started and causing you issues down the road. And with a natural fermentation like we're using in these native Lodi Native Zinfandels, you're just allowing the ambient yeast to do that for you. And one of the things we've noticed is there's a couple keys in that. Is first, we got to get the grapes picked, first thing in the morning when they're cool. And secondly, what you're doing out in the vineyard makes all the difference in the wine. And so it really is a reflection of the vineyard. And so if you're coming in with poor quality grapes, you're going to end up with a poor quality wine. And so it's really important that we get the best quality grapes. The native or natural fermentation takes much longer to get started, and so it can sometimes be 5 to 6 days before we start to see any fermentation activity in the grapes. And during this time, it's not just sitting there, doing nothing. There are other microorganisms and other things that are going on in the absence of an inoculated fermentation that are creating complexity in the finished wine. And so we'll get into tasting the wines in a little bit, but I think, when we decided this project, we always felt that Marion's Vineyard was the perfect place to do a project like this. And the Lodi Native Project really helped, put Lodi on the wine map and bring a lot of attention to the area, in showing and demonstrating that Lodi can really make terroir-driven wines that really represent the place that they come from.